Forward for me and perfect. All right. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to our second session with Pamela on the Childcare Business Leadership Institute. I think some of you have were with us the first session, but just to give you a little bit of background, because we have an amazing trainer and expert and advocate with us tonight. Let me pull this up. We have Pamela Hollingsworth with us tonight, and she has more than 30 years of experience in managing and building programs for children and the significant adults in their lives. She's an early childhood educator, content expert, strategist, and advocate. And she began her career in the corporate childcare sector, holding positions ranging from preschool teacher to a multi-site manager. She fulfilled a lifelong dream when she became the owner of a childcare center that served children from birth to 13 at the intersection of neighborhoods living in great wealth as well as great poverty. But unfortunately, that dream was interrupted by the Hurricanes Katrina and Wilma and the severe property loss that followed these storms. Hollingsworth holds a master's degree in multicultural education with a focus on strategic leadership, and she is a sought-after consultant and speaks nationally on such topics such as transforming organizations, managing change, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and building inclusive communities. She develops content and training institutes for a host of entities in the areas of business development, child poverty, teacher preparation, family engagement, building strategic partnerships, and diversity, equity, inclusion. So you are definitely all in great hands tonight. And thank you so much, Pamela, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Alyssa, and good evening, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. I see a few familiar faces from our first session, so thank you very much for coming back for round two. And without further ado, we are going to get started. This is our session 2. You've already been reminded who I am, so let's move to the next slide, please. The last time we were together, I mentioned that I typically start my workshops and presentations with a land acknowledgement. But that for the purpose of this series, I was doing something different, and I really wanted to elevate child care providers and those whom they serve and those who serve them. And I'm glad that I did that. It really, I think, really spoke to the evening and the work that we were setting out to do together. Today, I wanted to start with a centering thought. While I'm still elevating all of you and the work that you do, and this is by Margaret Mead, because our focus this evening is very much going to be focused on what can one person do? How can one become many? No one is coming to save us, but there are always helpers, hence my Mr. Rogers background this evening. And so we begin with this. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So really think about that and keep that in mind as you kind of seek to harness and recognize the power of one, the power of two, the power of many, as we go through our time together this evening. Let's go to the next slide, please. So just a reminder of the norms, which I shared with you last November. There is a leader in every single seat. We will co-construct knowledge, especially tonight, because we are going to be doing breakout sessions this evening. And we are taking a community-based approach to solutions and problem solving. And as always, I invite you to lean in and to share via the chat box or by unmuting. We're a small group tonight, so I especially hope that you'll feel comfortable and confident with unmuting and sharing, and then step forward and step back. Although with the size of our group this evening, there's really no need for that. So you can step forward and stay forward, and happily, I hope, engage. Let's go to the next slide, please. So you remember where we came from. We started on November 29th with a 90-minute institute. I sent you away with quite a bit of material that you could kind of pick or choose, or simply add to your resources to utilize or examine at a later date. There were things for you to listen to, specifically a podcast, No One Is Coming to Save Us, things for you to read, and also things for you to watch. So we'll be talking about some of those things reflectively this evening, but if you have not engaged or worked with any of the pre-service materials, the in-service materials, there's no problem with that. But I do encourage you to save them, to perhaps use them as a later date, especially the cost calculator. Next slide, please. Okay, so a few reflections on session one to kind of set the tone for this evening. And you'll hear me say a few times this evening, no one is coming to save us. If any of you have seen No Small Matter, which is a documentary that was making its way around the country a few years ago, I've had the great pleasure and honor of getting to know Rachel Giannini, who is a Montessori teacher in Chicago. It was featured in that documentary and since has really hit the speaking circuit and has spoken in Florida on a few occasions, and I deeply admire her. And she used this term, she's going to be doing something for me in January, and the last time I spoke with her, she actually was sitting in an early learning classroom as she was chatting with me, and she used that term, no one is coming to save us, and I said, well, that's a title actually of a very popular podcast that was started from a few moms from Hollywood who are of childbearing age and really began to look internally during the pandemic and saying, we're having problems finding childcare arrangements for our children, and we are people of means. What is it like if you're not? And they kind of coined the work and the movement that they began with nobody is coming to save us. But I, again, am going to preface this, add to that this evening. I do believe that nobody is coming to save us. We must do this work on our own. But as Mr. Rogers said so eloquently, look for the helpers. There are always helpers. There are always networks. The true cost of care and program operations, if you have not had an opportunity, and I know that all of us on the screen this evening serve early learning programs, please take a look at the cost calculators that are included in your resource packet. I added the resources for session 2, this evening's session, to this PowerPoint. So with this PowerPoint, you have all the resources for both sessions as well as the in-service. Hold on to that. These are websites that are very, very easy to navigate, but in terms of having that conversation about basic business practice, which is very important for early learning providers, whether they be childcare centers, faith-based programs, family childcare programs, etc. There's no such thing as a free lunch, and everybody has to be cognizant of and tuned into the bottom line. And as we move toward 2030 and kind of envisioning or reinventing childcare, which is one of the things we'll be talking about this evening, but that is the reality. We are at a crossroads, and we are in the midst of this reinvention, and it will continue. Understanding what the true cost of care and being able to earn what you're worth on so many levels. That relates to what families pay for care, how we advocate for additional help. There's a big conversation about whether or not childcare should be a public good, something that I actually happen to believe. And there are some resources in your guide for this evening that you can read up on if that's of any interest to you. But being aware of the true cost of care and encouraging the providers, the family homes and so forth with whom you work, being aware of that and keeping a very close eye on their budget and forecasting for the future as they continue to navigate the post-pandemic world is going to be extremely important. The economic landscape and what it means for childcare providers is something that was reflected in session one, as well as during opportunities in the resource packet. The economic landscape is changing. What parents need are changing, what they're looking for are changing. I was on a site visit this morning and I said to the provider, it looks, your program seems very full. Are you having any enrollment issues at all? And she said, well, I'm full this week. The first week of the month, I usually am running at about 50% utilization because many of my families have to decide whether or not they're going to pay the light bill or bring their children to school. And so she said, my enrollment is very low the first week of the month, and then it slowly creeps up. So today I have a full house. Everybody is present and accounted for, and, happily learning. Happily in school today, and I'm so happy to have them. So the economic landscape is changing for we as providers, but it's also changing for the families that we are so privileged to serve, and families are making various choices. I was having a conversation earlier with Alyssa as we were preparing for this evening, and was talking about watch out for family childcare, because that is the wave of the future, and many are saying that, and we're going to talk about that later this evening. But we laid the foundation in our first session for what we're going to be working on tonight. Workforce development partnerships. It was part of our goals for session number one, but we really didn't touch it. This evening we are going to and talk about some examples of partnerships and some things that you may be able to develop in your area, or you might be able to share that are already happening in your neighborhood or your community. And I'd be very much interested in hearing about that. And identifying and sizing up your new competition. Is that the program that is, tuned into a network with care.com? Is that a family childcare program? Is that Starbucks? Because they're paying $17 an hour and you're paying $13. So really getting a sense of, again, what your landscape is looking like economically from a workforce development, and also sizing up your new competition. All reflections from session one and from your in-service learning opportunities. Let's go to the next slide, please. So overview session two, you can see it's kind of jam-packed, but it's divided into three sections. If childcare is the solution, then what is the question? We're going to dig down to formulate solutions that work for you in New York State. Look who's gathering to institute change. Researchers, families, would-be entrepreneurs. There is more conversation about childcare, good, bad, or indifferent, in talking in wonderfully, complimentary tones, talking in highly hyperbolic tones. We talked about some of those words last time: broken, in despair, going nowhere, not the way that we necessarily feel about the work that we do, but this is what we're hearing in the media. And then saying, where are the childcare owners, directors, and practitioners? How tuned in, how looped in are they to advocacy and policy and business development? And let's get ready to prepare and to reimagine and reinvent our business models. We also want you to be the star of your own show, because after all, nobody is coming to save you. But look for the helpers. There are always helpers. And so we want you to be able to assess your program's strengths and weaknesses. And very importantly, we want you to be able to incubate new ideas. The days of the Santa, and I don't know if I have classroom teachers on the screen, but the days of the Santa with 25 holes because you've put it up 25 years that you've been in the classroom, that same Santa Claus or that same turkey, those days, it's time to leave those days behind. And we're going to start off this evening talking a little bit about change and how it feels to be in that space of ambiguity, where you're kind of letting go of what you know and moving into a place where you're maybe not so sure, and how you navigate that and stay calm inside of that. But incubating new ideas and developing performance-centered business strategies is going to be important also. Budgeting, 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 first, last, and always, and then marketing and enrollment. I come from the school where I had an enrollment book I kept by the phone, and I logged in every call that came in. I tried to close every call. You take the call, you get somebody in for a tour, and then you turn that tour into an enrollment. That's still extremely important, but there are so many other ways to reach families and get them into our programs these days. And we're going to be talking a little bit about this. Who's working for you? Business partnerships, where to begin? Partnerships, I think, are the most important thing. I remember several years ago when Hurricane Irma came storming through South Florida, the worst hurricane since Hurricane Andrew in South Florida. It was, as we were picking up the pieces, and I was in an evacuation zone. So by the time I got back to my home, back to my office, I looked around and realized I didn't know anybody that dealt with emergency management. I didn't have a contact. I would have told you prior to the storm that I was one of the best connected persons in South Florida. Every educational entity, if I didn't have a contact, I had a contact who had a contact there. I didn't know anybody at the Red Cross. I certainly didn't know anybody at UNICEF, and I didn't know anybody at Save the Children. Luckily, they found me. And the agency that I was representing was able to receive significant funding for restoration, because we had many scores of childcare centers that were completely decimated by the storm. Now, today, I'm part of a work group where we prepare every year for an emergency. And so we're one step ahead of it. And I think, again, so that's just one small example of the importance of partnerships, business partnerships, and again, networking. From your house to the State House to the White House, we'll talk a little bit about Advocacy 101, and I actually will also invite Jessica to share with us a little bit when we get to that section also. Again, workforce development partnerships, I slid that in because we didn't deal with that the last time we were together. And then, of course, identifying and sizing up your new competition, especially as we move toward 2030. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I'm a big fan of Margaret Wheatley, who has written a book called Turning to Each Other. And it's a very, I mean, it's perfect for me. I'm a reformed hippie. It's a very touchy-feely kind of book. And because I do a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, I tend to use a very, what I hope is a very retreat-like, intimate presentation style. But I felt this evening, I wanted to pull an essay that is included. There's a link to the essay in your resource packet, which is called Willing to be Disturbed. And when you think of change and making change, and you think about what that feels like and what it feels to be in that place of ambiguity. You know, I happen to be a person that is really comfortable working inside of ambiguity. The blank page causes me a great deal of tension and anxiety, yet at the same time, I'm addicted to it. I love it. I love starting with the blank page. Twyla Tharp talks about walking into the studio when she's getting ready to choreograph a ballet and walking in and she has nothing. And how she walks through that period of finding the inspiration, finding her way in the studio, and how she comes out the other end with a ballet and is able to do that time and time again. So my opening question to you this evening is, are you willing to be disturbed? As we work together to restore hope to the future, and that's what we're here to do, we need to include a new and strange ally, our willingness to be disturbed, our willingness to have our beliefs and our ideas challenged by what others think and by what we ourselves think. No one person or perspective can give us the answers we need to the problems of today. Paradoxically, we can only find those answers by admitting we don't know. We have to be willing to let go of our uncertainty and expect ourselves to be confused for a time. You know how you get that feeling when you get sent into a breakout room and you have all of these questions that are just a little bit abstract and maybe, a little bit ambiguous, and you're being asked to kind of, okay, respond to this question, think this through, reflect on this a little bit, that's one of the things we're going to be doing this evening. So I'm asking you if you're willing to be disturbed. Let's go to the next slide and we'll finish up this quote. The world now is quite perplexing. We no longer live in those sweet, slow days when life felt predictable. Remember before the pandemic, when you knew exactly what, where you were going to be working the following days, and there were no masks required. And early childhood had its challenges, certainly historical challenges. But so many of these challenges were exacerbated by what has been unfolding over the last couple of years. So that's what I'm thinking of, pre-pandemic, those sweet, slow days, comparatively speaking, when life felt predictable, when we actually knew what to do next or what was coming next. We live in a complex world. We often don't know what's going on, and we won't be able to understand its complexity unless we spend more time in the not knowing. And so that's why I ask you this evening, are you willing to be disturbed? Let's find out together. Next slide, please. So it's time for a change. So what is our role in creating change? And I'm going to open up. I'm actually going to open up so I can see y'all a little bit better. And tell us, share with us a time when you were an agent of change, perhaps in your early learning program or your agency or your family, any time in your life. And welcome, April. I see we have another person has entered the room, and I'd welcome you to unmute or to simply write in the chat box and make sure. Sometimes I shut my chat box on. I'm in so many meetings. Just want to make sure I'm showing chat previews. I was sharing I think the first time that I became a change agent for the early learning program that I had recently owned and was running, I needed student handbooks in a language other than English. And while I was serving families, my trading area, you can tell I have a corporate background, my trading area was 3 miles around, and it was highly diverse. Ethnically, from a language perspective, I was operating in a small city that per capita had the largest LGBTQ population in the country, even more than San Francisco, and still does. And the student handbooks for my families that were moving into kindergarten and their children were staying in my after school program were only in English. I had to travel across town to find these handbooks. And by the end of that school year, those handbooks were available in my home school where my children, the children that I was so privileged to serve, went to. So that was my first foray into being a change agent. I'd love to hear from one or two of you. And Alyssa's sharing that I am beginning ECLC's first LGBT affinity work group. I love that exclamation point. Congratulations. And we look forward to hearing more about that. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So thank you for being a change maker. Okay, let's move on then. I'm closing my chat box and we're going back. So we're going to go into breakout groups. And let me lay a few ground rules before we go. Let's see, we have 2, 4, 5. Alyssa, I'll leave it up to you whether you want to do 3, 2, or whether you want to keep everybody together. One way or the other, I think that's fine. What I will ask is that one person is identified as the facilitator to keep the answers to the questions going as you're in breakout, and that another person take notes. In between the facilitator and the note taker, one of you will be asked to report out. when you come out of breakout, when you come back to the main stage. And so let me lay the context for you. Childcare and early learning solutions are hot topics these days. That's why we're here after all. So I want you to break out and share a little bit. And the perspective is going to be different, since I think all of you that are here with us this evening are supporting early learning providers rather than being early learning providers, but perhaps you've been an early learning provider at some point in your career. Who, persons, agencies, politicians, etc., is leading the conversations in your community? Who is doing the work? And what are the hot topics in the community in which you're operating? Are childcare owners, operators, administrators, practitioners, etc., at the table? And if so, why? Or why not? And then the final question, so I was going to get your change-making input one way or the other. What role are you, or could you take in the change-making process? So with that, Alyssa is going to send you backstage for 10 minutes. Maybe we can put the questions in the chat box so that they can see them once they get there, or take a picture on your phone before you go. And we need a facilitator and a note taker, and I'll see you back here at the main stage in 10 minutes.
Yes, just give me 1 minute and I will do breakout rooms. To be totally honest, I haven't done them before, but I am sure it's easy to do. So I'm going to create 2 breakout rooms. And let's see what this does. Just want
10 minutes.
So while Alyssa's doing the breakout room, I don't process really quickly. Like when I see a question, I need a moment to like think about it. But I do have an answer to the question, if that's okay.
Worse,
About
please.
So I think one of the first times I made a really big change in my daycare program was the program that I was assistant director at during the holiday seasons, because we're in the holiday. We did a lot about Christmas, and it was great because everybody loves Christmas, kids love Santa, but that was really all we really featured and focused on. So when I took over, and opened my own family daycare, I wanted to make sure that I was really, really inclusive with all the families that I had. So I went and embarked on this journey of like end of year celebrations. And I think by the end of it, we were celebrating like 5 or 6 different end of year celebrations. We had the 3 most common, Christmas, Hanukkah, and Kwanzaa, but we were also celebrating solstice. We were celebrating Diwali, just a lot of different things, and really like bringing in these cultures, right? Like doing story time and having food from all these different regions and doing projects. And it was really, really great. And I had a lot of really good feedback from the parents, and and some of the kids were not Jewish, but they just enjoyed learning about the culture, right? And and I had a lot of really good feedback from parents saying like, oh, little Johnny loved learning about this, and now he wants to celebrate Hanukkah at home, and I don't know what to do because we don't have anything. And I'm like, that's okay, I got you.
I love it. Thank you.
So it was really great to do that.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. And what a great way to advocate. And that's something that you're laying a foundation in the children that they'll never forget. And so I think we're...
Pamela, do you want to still do breakouts, or do we want to see if any other folks have to share in the larger group?
I would like to do the breakout.
All right, I've got it set up, so you should be getting a notification to join.
Okay. 5,
Bye-bye.
3, 2, 1. You did it.
All right, cool.
Is April with you, or is she's okay, she's a
Yes.
participant.
Okay, cool. Sorry. That it was not I had to manually do it for some reason.
Okay, all right. Very good, very good.
Podcast.
So come on in, come on in. We're going to begin recording again. Let's see, so we have one, it looks like we have one group back. Let's wait for the rest of us to come back. All right. And Tiffany is coming back. I think that's everyone. Okay. So you had an opportunity to, kind of be in a space that was maybe a little bit ambiguous. I'd love to hear what some of your thoughts are, and especially hear about what the hot topics are in the communities that you serve. Which group would like to go first? Tiffany, yes.
Well, don't mind going first because it was just me and a lovely Katie in our breakout room. So it was a small group. So I guess I was to be pretty sure. At the ending, Miss Katie, she also brought up the topic of in her area about providers not getting paid enough and that they're going to increase the pay and stuff like that for them. So that's definitely a hot topic in her area, and OCFS is really who is in charge basically of all the decisions where her CCNR is located.
Mhm.
In New York City, I discussed with her that DOH, Department of Health, Department of Education, and Department of Investigation, DOH, DOI, and DOE, they are basically the three that basically makes all the decisions for either childcare, school age, even preschool that's in, public schools and things like that. They basically the ones that make all the decisions and regulations. We definitely work with OCFS as well. One advocate of change one situation I've been with, change, or your question, I can't really reiterate it, but basically my answer to your question is, when I was working in a daycare program, I was in a 3-year-old classroom. This was right at a time when UPK was being introduced. This was like with Mayor Bloomberg. So it really wasn't in every daycare yet. It really was just like a new idea, things like that. So being in a 3-year-old classroom already, they wanted to transition this into a UPK classroom and get DOE funding and things like that. The problem became that it just was like they came in and just was like, everything is wrong, 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 wrong. But they didn't give us the skills. They didn't give us the knowledge of the how to and why things are changing. So it might seem like the teachers or was resistant to the change of UPK or DOE, but it really was that we didn't have the knowledge or understanding what was going on, why these changes was occurring, why we couldn't do certain things. Like one simple example would be artwork. If you hung up a child's artwork in your classroom, a regular 3-year-old classroom, the child does the artwork, you write their name on it, you put it up, and you showing off their artwork. DOE come in, that's a complete violation to them because you wrote on this child's artwork. You needed to put it on a label and put it on their artwork. And, instead of just explaining that to us, they'll just be like, wrong, 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 violation, violation, violation. So it was hard to make those adjustments because it's like, I don't understand what's going on. So being a part of the daycare council helps us with these home providers that DOE has come in and now have all these requirements, trying to give them the understanding and the knowledge of why these changes are occurring, how they can adapt them into their program, and why it would be beneficial to them, because then maybe they'll be less resistant to the change.
Mm.
But DOE has definitely came in and they are taking over everything. Home providers are having a hard time transitioning and following their requirements and adapting it to them so that they can still get these grants and apply to these networks and get these children, because now they need more education. They just need a lot more now.
Thank you, Tiffany and Katie. Thank you so much. And I really want to elevate that example. I think that it's a really prime example. It's kind of difficult to be a change maker if you don't have the tools, you know, and I think that's really some of what you were illustrating. The other thing that I would say is, you know, I mentioned earlier the term, you know, elevating the beneficiary, you know, keeping in mind who's the end user. And some of the conversations I've been having recently relate to a very simple concept, which is human-centered design or liberatory design. Are we designing a program for me, or are we designing a program for you?
Right.
And if it's for you, then why aren't we designing the program together? And how can we make that happen? And that's very, very much possible. And human-centered design is not just something in the education or the social services arena. The Social Security Administration is you know, making some forays into that. But I think anytime we're implementing any kind of program or making any kind of policy change inside of our early learning program, if it relates to families need to be at the table when you're making that plan and making those decisions. And certainly in a situation like this, you know, who I'd love to see, you know, who the planning and implementation team looks like and who's part of that. Because again, that opportunity for human-centered design, it sounds like that was lacking. And so do you think that maybe the program could have gotten up and running a little bit faster or perhaps a little bit more effectively had those of you that were doing the real work, the boots on the ground work in the classroom, you know, working, you know, with the children in an extremely well-meaning fashion, you know, had the tools and were at the table so that you really didn't have a sense that it was being done to you, but you were doing it together. So thank you for sharing. So that's an excellent example. Group 2, or maybe it was group 1. I don't know how you were numbered inside of your breakout rooms. Who's speaking for you?
Augusto, you want to speak first because I said it all.
Gotcha. So I wish I would have I wish I would have taken a picture of the questions. But what Delma basically was explaining on how she was working for the Concourse House shelter for for women and children, and how she basically started an advocacy group for her shelter while she was with them. And in that advocacy group, she basically took all the parents' inputs and, you know, basically however they felt on the issues that their children were facing in school. They were basically able to talk about that. She met with families and communities on how change affects the children's education, and the advocacy group became a voice in the community as well. And that advocacy group still exists today. And with that advocacy group, parents are able to have a say in what the children are able to like learn and digest. Because without an advocacy group, the children really won't have a voice. So that advocacy group was able to give an insight to families on how the daycares work and how they're able to work with little to no pay, basically little to no resources, and still actually be able to get a daycare up and running. So that advocacy group actually was a big factor within the community. From what Delma was explaining to us, as well as
Yeah, it happened also, like Tiffany just mentioned, it happened when they started the early learn programs and how everything was going to be changing in that program. So because it was based in within a shelter system, or shelter building, and they had one class that was for the community, which was for preschool. And then the shelter children were in separate classrooms. They had an infant toddler classroom and they had a preschool. So they were basically, like wondering, how is it that the shelter system was working and was helping their classrooms, and how UPK is now going to start in their classroom, and what is it that they're going to bring and how is it working, and it was all based on ACS contractual agreements, because that's what we had. So there was a lot going on, and within that time, and within the whole community,
Yes.
excuse me, basically. So there was a lot of advocacy done in part of Lisa Coswell, who used to be at the Daycare Council, and she was our policy advocate. And so during that time, she like brought me on board. So because I knew I was part of the borough meetings with the directors. And she was like, Delma, you're the best one because you know what's going on. So we all started working on that piece of it. And I also mentioned to Agosto that today in the evening news, I heard that Mayor Adams is now going to change the universal pre-K, and that he says that it's not really universal because a lot of children in special education are not, they don't have seats available for them. So I already know now the calls are going to start coming in
Yes.
as of tomorrow. But we do a lot of that work, Daycare Council.
Mhm.
And our public policy person is Gregory Brinder, and he's really good. So I know we're going to have some good discussions.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that, Delma, and thank you for being such a strong advocate. And Jessica sharing that Lisa is one of her heroes, and she also read that in the news. So, thanks for staying on top of what's happening.
Yeah. And Gregory's on our public policy committee, so.
Yeah, he's great.
All right, so you got the right folk at the table. Okay, well, thank you for sharing, and thank you for coming back to the main stage with so much to share. And we'll move to the next slide, please. So be the star of your own show. Again, summoning up that phrase, no one is coming to share us, but look for the helpers. There are always helpers. According to data from the Bipartisan Policy Center, and this is New York State data, which I pulled from a brief created by the First 5 Years Fund, New York Solving America's Childcare Crisis, linked in your resources. In New York, there are more than 877,000 children under the age of 5 in need of care. Yet only 471,000 childcare slots. So there's a 400,000 different and change difference there. Over 46% of kids under 5 in New York are without the childcare that they need. Rural communities in New York are more underserved than urban communities. Parents in New York spend an average of $13,000 plus a year for center-based infant care. And if their infant is in home-based care, they're paying just under $10,000, $9,794 on average. This puts quality care options out of the reach of many families. Now you can get, the entire brief is linked in your bio. Jessica and many of you may already have reviewed this brief. So my question for conversation is, how is your early learning program or the programs that you serve rising to the challenge of being able to meet these diverse needs? This takes us back to that conversation. Where are the children? Where are those 400,000+ children? Are their parents no longer working outside of the home? Are they in other kinds of childcare arrangements, kith and kin care, friend and neighbor care. How do families cope when they are unable to meet the high cost of childcare? One of the briefs that's also in your resources, as I was reading through it in preparation for this, it was a real-time young family who owns a restaurant in Washington, DC. And I confirmed it by Googling the restaurant, and their children were just slightly older than described in the article. And I mean very slightly older, like a year older. This family, because of their income, is cobbling together care across a network of friends, families, and neighbors 5 days a week for 2 children. And their eldest entered kindergarten this past September, last September. And so that has eased the challenge and the burden and the strain on them somewhat. So I will pause there. So here is some New York data. How are you working with programs to meet this need and to rise to this challenge? And what are some of the strengths of the programs that are able to do this? And if any of the team members from the Early Care and Learning Council would like to weigh in on this one, would love to hear your thoughts. How are programs coping with this reality?
Not well. Unfortunately, I mean, yeah,
Yeah, it's a tough one.
it's tough.
I definitely second that. They're definitely struggling, day by day, literally. We get the calls all day, every day. Some have 1 or 2 children. Sometimes I hear, oh, I'm fully enrolled. I'm like, wow, really? It's shocking. Some areas they're full, and in some areas there's none. And in some areas they just have 1 child enrolled. So they're really, so they're struggling.
Yeah, and
I've been hearing more now, I would say, but I've been hearing more now, is that grandmas and aunts, cousins, now they're coming back into play. And that's a little bit unnerving, because grandma really doesn't know what the baby's gonna do in 1 second to the next. And is grandma really capable of taking care of the child? And it's a lot. I'm a grandma, and my daughter has to let me know like 30 days in advance for me to take care of my granddaughter. and I know about daycare and stuff, so imagine I don't have that patience. So, and I know this.
Yeah, thank you,
Imagine-
gentlemen.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jessica, I see.
I'm sorry.
Jessica.
no,
I
I was just gonna echo what, and Heidi, feel free to jump in on this, but I was just gonna say, I mean, what we're hearing around the state is it's not so much programs closing as it is if it's a center, it's closing of classrooms. It's just we just don't have staff.
Yeah, I mean, I know that at least here in my area, I'm in upstate New York. I work with Ulster, Columbia, and Greene County, and I know that a lot of the daycare centers are suffering. They can't hire the staff that they need, so they are closing those classrooms. However, I will say, with the Desert Grant opportunity, we did have a couple of our family programs that increase capacity to group family, which allows them to take more kids. So that's a positive, that's a strength. Unfortunately, a couple of those in the Columbia and Greene County that could have really benefited were not chosen for the Desert Grant. But that's something that they knew going in, but they still made the choice to expand, which is great. So I think, it's kind of a mixture of everything, right? You have programs that are expanding to try to increase the capacity of the kids that they can take. And then you have parents that are resourcing to, like, do a nanny share because they can't find a daycare that, and part of it is quality, right? Because I do believe that there are options out there. I know as a CCRNR that there are daycares that are not full. But I also know that what people are looking for in childcare now is shifting, right? People are looking for more of an educational component, more of a curricula-based program. And I find that a lot of people are actually even looking at non-traditional learning, right? Your Montessori's, your Reggios, your Waldorf, a lot of these, nature-based, play-based programs. And unfortunately, a lot of daycares have not made that change, right? A lot of our providers are stuck in, we've been doing this for 30 years. We keep the babies, like Delma was saying, we keep the babies safe. We talk to them, but, the program doesn't go beyond those sort of things. And a lot of the professional parents that are looking for childcare now are looking for those sort of programs. And they're not willing to put their kids in a program that they don't feel is competent,
Yeah.
and that's when they do those nanny shares,
Yeah.
and that's when they do, like, if I'm going to be paying $300 for my kid to sit in front of the TV, I'll just have grandma do it because it's free, like there's
You
no
definitely-
reason to pay for that, in their eyes. So it's kind of gearing the programs that we have to kind of make that change and sort of shift that, educational component, because I do think that that's one of the things that the parents are looking for now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think as we have conversations about shoring up your business model, guerrilla marketing, getting that app on your phone, it's important that we not forget that at the end of the day, families are looking for what's best for their children. And they certainly want to feel that this is going to be an environment where their child will learn and thrive and be nurtured also. And I think I agree. There was a time when many families would settle just for the nurturing, they would say, well, he's not learning much, but they really care about the children and they keep him so clean. But we are hearing, it has to be everything. And I truly believe that the early education is a civil right. 10 years ago, I was saying reading is a civil right. In that young children and the importance of literacy. And now I'm saying the same thing in terms of, the accessibility, the access to high quality early learning experiences and is a civil right for children. And then I will add to that, and those programs need to be exceedingly well run, as well as being very high quality. So this is the reality. I don't come to you this evening with answers. I come to you with an opportunity to dig deeper, to reflect, and to think about what, if any, changes in your practice you might implement. Maybe Delma takes another turn and dives into another element or area of advocacy. The same with Katie and others that are on the call this evening. To me, this is an opportunity. This is a step along the way with continued practice, because nobody's coming to save us. Next slide, please. So who's working for you? Incubate new ideas, extremely important. And it goes back to networking. I think one of my biggest takeaways from my time with Wonder Schools a couple weeks ago was the importance of networking, budget and forecasting, first, last, and always, being very future focused on marketing and enrollment. I'm going to go through this rather quickly because we've touched on this in other conversations earlier this evening. Be thinking about the software marketing, be open to the new thing. to what's coming down the pike, a new way of approaching a situation or a solution. Identify and plan strategic partnerships. And this is also part of networking. I talked about my association, you know, in the aftermath of a climate disaster, a hurricane. I come to you today saying that I can pick up the phone and call someone and save the children any hour of the day or night, and they will pick up the phone. You know, I didn't have that, you know, when we were picking up, you know, when we were in the aftermath of Hurricane Irma. Making sure that you're part of professional organizations. That seems obvious. I think we're aware of our professional organizations, but being part of that membership, joining their advocacy council or their policy committee, easily accessible to you, and it provides you, and especially for childcare owners. So often when I enter a professional organization, I see people like me. The only faces I see at the table. I look very closely for that diversity, to be sure that the beneficiary, that we're entering a human-centered process, so that all minds are created or thought of as equal partners. And because there's so much that we can learn from each other. Early childhood education advocacy organizations, Childcare Aware of America. If you're not a member of that, you should be. If you're not following what they're doing with policy and advocacy, obviously NAEYC, the Alliance for Early Education. There are a number of them, and I've linked several in the resources area as well. Often overlooked, Chamber of Commerce. If you're, you know, working at the grassroots level in your community, you should definitely be looped into your chamber. I shared earlier a story about a woman in Wisconsin that had started a movement from a table and chair, literally in her family childcare home, and she had changed a law. You know, she started reaching out to her local Chamber of Commerce, trying to get the chamber on board with the advocacy issue that she was promoting. And over time, she had a great deal of success. Extremely important. Now, conversely, or serendipitously, chambers of commerce can often be very expensive for childcare providers to join. So there's another opportunity to kind of navigate those rapids, look for organizations that can support the membership or speak to the chambers to encourage them to provide tiered membership opportunities. Obviously, it's small businesses and childcare. Most childcare centers are classified as small businesses, but to be sure that we have an access situation. So often when we're creating a movement or encouraging folk to move forward in a particular area, we see that the design of an organization, as for instance, a Chamber of Commerce, an entity like that needs to thrive. Obviously, membership dues is a big part of that. So the very people that they are there to help often may not have access. Again, another opportunity for an important advocacy conversation. I always encourage SCORE, which is a resource partner of the Organization of Retired Executives, a great resource partner of the U.S. Small Business Association. Very important to become involved with. Workforce boards. Over the past 2 years, let me backtrack. For the past close to 8 years, I have reached out consistently to the workforce board that manages the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Block Grant for partnership to support early educators. It was never a possibility because, unfortunately, and in many cases this is still the case, early educators could not earn a working wage, a living wage. So the partnership was untenable at that time. Post-pandemic, educator salaries in some markets, in South Florida, as an example, happens to be one of those markets. The salaries are inching up slightly. Plus, some legislation has occurred, so the minimum wage has gone up. So that has opened the door. So in the past 2 years, I've been able to work with the workforce board to develop 3 programs, all benefiting early childhood. The first is an internship program, which matches at-risk, out-of-school youth that think they might be interested in early learning, an opportunity to go in and put in 120 hours of paid work experience in an early learning program, working under a master teacher or a mentor inside the classroom. And the workforce pays the intern salary and also pays for a small amount of training, state mandated training that is required to work successfully in early learning. One example. The most recent examples have been a pre-apprenticeship program and an apprenticeship program. Both of these programs are registered and will provide a pathway. These programs are in association with an early learning agency, the workforce board, as well as the local college. So again, a good example of what a partnership can look like, and would love to hear about any apprenticeship or any kind of training programs or existing relationships. And I would say, since we're running short on time, write that in the chat box for me. Let's move on to the next slide. Advocacy 101. This is some very basic bullet points that I have pulled straight from the NAEYC policy and advocacy portion of the website. Although part of our broader program is a full session on advocacy. You know, so you start with a strategic plan of action, very obviously, and then think about what success looks like. How will you know you've done a good job? You know, I would, I know Delma spent some time earlier talking about, some of her policy and advocacy work. And, I'd love to hear from you if we have time before, or maybe you can write in the chat box. What was your vision? When you were starting out, did you have a sense of what success looked like? And did that drive you along the way? Who's your target audience? Who are you trying to reach? Who is the beneficiary? And who needs to know? And sometimes the person that needs to know is very different from the beneficiary. What are your goals? Your strategies? What tactics are you going to use? Mapping this plan out piece by piece. What's your timeline? Each year I work with a group that has an early education legislative agenda. We keep it very simple. There's never more than 3 points on the agenda. And we reach out to the Chamber of Commerce so that there's an alignment, so that there's more than one voice speaking on this behalf. And then session starts. And we say, we'll see what sticks. It's usually, and I'm sure Jessica and others, it's very familiar, right up until the end of session. It's every day, it's a different conversation. It's a different roller coaster. Sometimes we say we'll be happy if we get one of the 3. Which one of the 3 is going to get traction this year? Sometimes we say we're going in this year, it's going to take 3. And all of a sudden we have success at the end of the legislative session. So we're never really quite sure. But so you've got to have a timeline, but that timeline needs to be flexible. Understand your messages and your necessary message training. I will bet, based on what Delma shared earlier, that you have an elevator speech, whether you know it or not, in your head, so that if you have 2 or 3 minutes with somebody in something that you need to share, something that's important, you have that on the tip of your tongue. Understanding that and knowing that, that's what's important. And I think these are the kinds of messages for those of you that support childcare centers and early learning programs and family childcare homes. You can carry these messages back to the providers that you serve to encourage, lay the foundation for that interest in advocacy, get them, interested in doing a little bit of networking with fellow providers and identify some of the things we've been talking about this evening. I can see some points for a legislative agenda in almost everything that we've discussed. I think one of the things we do really well nationally, locally, and statewide is we're really good at identifying the problem. And then, of course, we're always continuously working towards solutions and often make great strides. We've had many success stories shared this evening. But for me, I'd love to see childcare providers and family childcare home operators getting on the firing lines and taking up this work and moving it forward. You got to have strong relationships with key decision makers. I talked a little bit about that. You got to be aware of organizational capacity. And of course, you've got to know your knowledge and landscape. I'm going to pause there for somebody that's way smarter than me and does this work every day. Jessica, if there's anything that you would like to add or dust up a little bit of this kind of initial approach.
Oh, stop him. Well, that's very flattering. You have way more experience than I do. But I will say we just had a policy committee meeting this afternoon. So it's definitely ever changing every year in terms of our issues. But I will say that as much as it is ever changing, I will contradict myself at the same time, because sometimes they're the recurring issues, in that you have to accept your defeats. And we have some of the same things. You can't expect that you're gonna have one agenda and then at the end of the session you're gonna get all your wins and then be able to move on to something else next year. You have to build upon things that you do in this year and keep going. We also had another meeting earlier today where we were talking about kind of just the timeline of our legislative session and how we're going to do rallies and stuff, and how we have to, as the session goes on, continue beating the drum. And it's throughout the session and as the budget cycle goes on, to remember to keep being the squeaky wheel with the lawmakers, because if we don't keep reminding them, they're going to think that we don't care anymore. We've accepted our defeat and they'll go on to fund somebody else. So it's the repetition. I think this group who I talk to all the time, I think you all know this because you are the most persistent people I know. You definitely are determined to get what you need to get done. So I think translating that to advocacy will be pretty easy for you. And most of you are advocates at heart. So this is not really, we're not really teaching you anything that you don't really necessarily know. I think the only thing that's different about advocacy is lawmakers sometimes are intimidating to people because it's those people that are in that big, scary building that are, they're wearing suits and they're elected by people, but they're elected by all of us. They work for us. So that's the biggest thing that I think that I tell people with Advocacy 101 is they're just people. Remember that. And in terms of your expertise, you are the experts. We're all I'm sitting here listening to your stories because you're the experts that do this work every day. And it's the same thing when it's a lawmaker. You're the expert. So remember that too, because the lawmaker doesn't know anything about childcare. They have so many issues. There's something crazy, 11,000 bills introduced during a session in Albany. They can't know everything about all of those issues. So they're counting on the people who come in to meet with them to teach them about things. So what you tell them about childcare is what's the truth to them. So when you talk about it, that's the truth. So, and if you don't know the answer to something, say they really press into something, the best answer is, I don't know, I'll get back to you. And you know what that does? That opens up an opportunity to follow up. And that's the best thing.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. What's top of list for this session? And so two-part question, what's top of list? And are there any concerns with falling off the cliff with some of the ARPA dollars that you're implementing?
So yes, absolutely. I'm concerned with that. And so for the Early Care and Learning Council, we're putting together an agenda. And part of that is actually the jobs of the people that are right here is we want to ensure that they're continually employed through past the 2023 and 2024, because we know the work you're doing now to stabilize the work, the providers and stuff. It's not just that, it's business support. I mean, everything we've uncovered, you know, that everything we've been talking about, it's childcare programs, learning to actually operate as businesses, and you all are those supports. So that's actually part of the ask. We're actually asking OCFS to permanently fund those positions rather than, because it's ARPA dollars right now. So as those run out, we would like the state to take that on as a permanent part. And so that is the Early Care and Learning Council's ask, but then the larger coalition ask, we're asking for a workforce fund for the field, because we know that providers are definitely really suffering.
Yes.
And so that's part of it.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing and giving us a glimpse. And, you know, thank you for your service and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we are coming to a close, so our last breakout is not going to be possible. I'm actually very well known to overplan sessions. I guess that's always my safety net in case I have a group. I did a 12-month session during the pandemic. I was with this group once a month, and I talked to probably 50 darkened screens for 1 year. Only the executive director showed her face. And so I always have to be prepared for, you know, not wanting to talk or not wanting to chat box. With this group, I've had both. So thank you so much. So this is not going to be our breakout session, but I'll touch a little bit on this slide. What will childcare look like in 2030? And we're not going to, you know, crack that nut tonight. Probably not tomorrow either, but I want you to, and I will ask you to keep it top of mind as you go forward with your meaningful work, your very meaningful work every day. Today's children, Generation Alpha, who knew? Am I the only person that didn't know that birth to 5 was Generation Alpha? Nobody told me. I happened to read it in Dr. Washington's article on the most diverse in history. So that's one thing that's coming, you know, for as we go toward 2030. We talked about the importance of high quality early learning and high quality and nurturing care and responsive caregiving that's culturally responsive, linguistically responsive, cognitively, social and emotionally responsive. One of the reasons, by the way, so many families are saying they prefer the smaller group size in family childcare settings. So we got to be aware of that. And then, of course, we've talked consistently throughout our time together about the economic landscape and how that's shifting for many families, both and how that affects families and their reality and how they raise their children and how they seek the best experiences for their children and how it affects the people with whom we work and we serve. So, you know, be thinking about what the programs that you serve need to be doing more of or less of, you know, keeping in mind, you know, the being open to innovation, you know, keeping in mind that staying current, but perhaps holding on to some traditional things, you know, like social and emotional support is never going to go out of style in an early learning program, nor is it ever going to go out of style between people. So when you think about what you need to do more of and what you need to do less of, be thinking of the kind of those soft skills and hard skills at the same time. And then think about the new business models. There's a reason why entities like My Village and Wonder School are, you know, on fire right now and really making a big difference. And there's a reason why they're working so closely with quote unquote alternative care associations. You know, care.com is doing some amazing work in this arena. And throughout the pandemic, care.com and another boutique kind of hotel-based early childcare program we spent a little time working with both of them early on in the pandemic. And then, of course, keeping in mind for 2030, how you're going to navigate the true cost of care. We're not going to do a breakout. We have 1 minute left. Let's go to the next slide. And so in closing, I'm going to say, while there will be different approaches, our leaders must start treating childcare as a vital part of our economy. And so do we. So do we as early learning professionals, teachers, the continuous professionalization of the field, providers, asking, making sure, going, thanks for the thumbs up, Delma. I'm glad you agree, thinking about, going back to Ann Mitchell and Louis Stoney and the Iron Triangle, you're fully enrolled and you're getting that tuition. How do you make that happen? Being, not letting families slide when, who was it? Somebody was sharing last week. I was reminded of the check is in my pocket. Is it still late if I have it in my pocket? Katie, I think I was reminded of that earlier this evening. So think about all the different approaches and all the various things that we have to do. This is extremely complex work. Taking care of children, taking care of other people's children, as Lisa Delpit so eloquently reminds us of, is extremely complex and not easy work, but from my perspective, it is the most meaningful work that any of us can do. We just need to be sure that we're doing it well. Next slide, please. So we're going to end with a little bit of restorative practice. In closing, one of the questions is the same as our last session. Share with us one takeaway from tonight's session. Share with us a word or phrase that captures the promise of your work. And a little bit different, share with us one act you will commit to in the advocacy arena. And with that, I'm going to make my head squares bigger. There we go. Who'd like to go first?
Well, I would definitely say that my aim, which it's been since this whole COVID thing happened and everybody's coming back into the reality of now we have to change and move forward. My biggest thing is that we have to, how would I say, take the providers and let them know that, the reality is that you have a business, the service that you're doing for the children are very, very important right now. I mean, it's the biggest influence that you have right now into your communities and also getting these children into the, society. You have to remember that. And so one of the biggest things that I spoke to my child director, which is Miss Sophia, was that we have to be more ambiguous with trainings and getting into those sites. A lot of directors are now like stand back on that, and they don't want to hear about that. You have to do business different. It's a different world now circulating. You got to be different. You got to be more proactive, hands-on, get out into the community and learn to market your program, learn of your community, let the community know you're there, that kind of proactiveness that they have to get out from that chair and get into the community. I remember there was a time that we had to do that. So, legends are built on that. I believe that, you have to really be proactive in your community and learn everything, absorb everything. And so I've been busy with the business trainings and program operations trainings because I noticed that there's a big need there. So I know I'm definitely going forward with that.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Would anyone else like to share?
I think what it is that even like a lot of people that's on this call, they have the experience of it, but even someone coming into the CCNR role and having the providers and seeing this work dealing with the stabilization grant, what it is, I think, is that the word change in all aspects scares people. And you cannot move forward or progress if you don't change. Even for myself, if I'm transparent, sometimes I don't like change. Like my family will say, oh, you hate change, but you have to embrace change because you'll never get anywhere unless you have it. So a lot of these providers are grandfathered in, and some of them, like to Delma's point, they don't want to really do that change. But to also with just point, and I think you said it earlier, Pamela, they have to realize that the people that are having kids now, they're younger. They're on TikTok, they're on Snapchat, they're on Instagram. So you have to accommodate that demographic. And if you're not, you're gonna lose them. And hence why you will have like retention problem. You're not, enrollment, because the change, and people are fearful of change in personal and professional, and even here with their, how they run their business. So I think change is the problem.
I agree. Thank you, Nadesh. Appreciate it. Anyone else?
I think, moving forward, I think my advocacy will be two-part. I think part of me is always going to advocate for the child, right? Like having the child have that, the concept of the whole child, the social, emotional, as well as the education component, right? And not the educational component as in standardized tests and making sure that they're reading and writing by the time they go to kindergarten, because that's not what I talk about when I talk about quality and education. I talk about like the social emotional component of it, and then just those learning through play experiences, right? That's when I'm talking about education, that's what I'm referring to. So having those, working on that with the providers, but I also feel like it's more than ever necessary to advocate for the providers themselves, right? And not just like for them to realize that they're running a business, but also for like the mental health component of it, right? We are right now, this year was like catch up from the last 2 years that the world was drastically different. I just read a post on Facebook where it was like, why are you surprised that you're exhausted at the end of the year? This was a catch-up year from everything that happened in 2021 and 2020 that no one was expecting, right? Like, why do you feel like you shouldn't be exhausted right now? So I think that there has to be more advocacy in self-care and mental health, because as a family provider, you are the only one, right? And I worked in family daycare for 15 years, and I know what it's like to be the only one in that classroom with 6 kids, and you're just like, oh, okay. So I think, removing that stigma from mental health and self-care, and teaching the providers that it's okay to say like, I'm not okay right now. Like I'm okay, but I'm not okay. And just giving them tools and trying to, give them ways to help themselves, right? That self-care component. So I think that's really moving forward what I want to focus on.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for the reminder. We could have time for one more if anyone else would like to share.
Mine's is just brief and short, and it's basically what everyone said, just to piggyback off of that. And yeah, like they always say, you could give someone fish or you could teach them how to fish. So being a part of the daycare council and giving these home providers the tools and the knowledge that they need to go out there and make the best of their situation, whatever works best for them in their particular situation. And, just giving them that information and that knowledge. Everything doesn't have to be a shock or surprise or pop quiz. Like, I think if you have the information and you know what's coming to you, you know how to prepare for it.
Well said. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you very much. Well, Tiffany, Augusto, Delma, Katie, April, I want to thank you for hanging in with us for 2 sessions. It has been my great pleasure. I feel humbled as well as honored to have had the opportunity to share a screen with you. for these 2 sessions. And I'm walking away with a lot of great lessons and a lot of wisdom. And I want to thank all of you for your service and your continued commitment to the children and families of New York State. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for your hard work and for you sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with all of us. It's really lovely to have you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Pamela. And I'd agree with that. And it was so great to get to know all of you more, working with all of you in the stabilization grant stuff. It was just nice to get to know you in a small group.
Yes, well said. Well said, and thank you, Alyssa and Jessica and Nadej also for, giving me a shot. It's been great spending this time with you, and I look forward to seeing you all. I will be at the cafe on Thursday with Dr. Brian, so it's super excited about that. So I attend most of them. So and I was telling Alyssa when we started, I forwarded the link to probably 6 people today. Everybody I was on a site visit with this morning. In fact, I recommended the book also to 2 people.
Definitely going to be a good one.
Yes, very excited. And if you haven't read his book, please get it. And fascinating, his approach and the conversations about the importance of males of color in the birth to 5 space is something that we're just not talking a lot about. We talk about that in the K-12 space, but not in the birth to 5 space. So that they're always wonderful, but I'm particularly excited about Dr. Brian on Thursday. So I'll see probably some of you then. We'll be on the same screen, although we won't be able to see each other. But again, it's been my great pleasure. And I look forward to possibly serving you at some time in the future. And, I close the way I always do, from my end of the internet to yours. Namaste. And thank you for sharing a screen with me this evening. Thank you.